Okay, great. It's 2:05, so let's get started. I'm just gonna do a brief intro. I think most of you probably know Sam. I think Sam has he's probably one of our top
A
contributors here.
multitude. It's been so many over the years. Yeah.
I think you're going, easily over a half dozen at this point. But in my opinion, they just keep on getting better and better.
Well, thank you, Roger.
Well, those of you who went to the one 2 weeks ago, that was probably one of my favorite talks on ableism. So that will be available for everyone to view in the near future. But today, Sam is going to be talking about neurodiversity more generally. So if folks have, I mean, this is a word that's used all the time, and I wonder how many folks have had sort of a ground up introduction versus sort of cobbling together what it is, from what you hear, now and then. But Sam is going to help us understand the topic as thoroughly as he can in
the next hour or so.
But oh yeah, I should say, what we're going to do in this session is if you could please put your microphones on mute until the end. We're going to have Sam do his presentation first because he's got a lot of ground to cover. And then at the end, we will open it up for discussion and questions. I'm just going to read the bio from our posting here. So Sam Farmer is a neurodiversity community self-advocate, consultant, public speaker, and prolific author. He has led intriguing discussions about his book, A Long Walk Down a Winding Road, available at www.samfarmerauthor.com. We'll put a link in the description of the video when it comes out. This describes his autistic self-discovery while serving as a self-help book for lots of people. Sam also has led our Deep Thinker series. So I mentioned there's about 6 videos already with Sam, and he's got more on his website. So I would definitely encourage you to go to his website, where you'll also find lots of articles and blogs, many of which have been he's presented in our series. So
Podcasts,
Sam,
author talk videos, whole bunch of stuff. Yeah.
absolutely. So thank you again, Sam, for sharing your wisdom and knowledge, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Roger. And thank you all, everybody, for being here. Good day. My name is Sam Farmer. I can say that I'm proudly and unapologetically autistic. Took me a while to get there, but I'm there. And this is Neurodiversity 101. Quickly about my book, in case you're not familiar. Like Roger said, it's self-help and lived experience type stories all rolled into one. It describes what it can be like to be autistic and not know it until age 40. From the point of view of an individual like me who walks in those shoes, and where I've been very fortunate to have had happiness and success in my life, it's sharing ideas and insights around how I got there in the face of all kinds of challenges and adversities. And I talk about workplace success, what I went through in terms of social skills development, rising above bullying, what I call marriaging or being a good spouse, parenting, both from the perspective of me as a father to my son, as well as me being a son to my parents, and most importantly, a lot on self-esteem building. That's a long walk down a winding road in a nutshell. So regarding neurodiversity, it's very important to realize that neurodiversity refers to all of us, everybody, the human population as a whole. Neurodivergent individuals don't own neurodiversity in that regard. It refers to all of us. And it speaks to the diversity of minds and what I like to think of as ways of being within the human population, because our minds, our brains, our nervous systems, the way they are wired, inevitably shapes the way we interact with the world, the way we show up to the world, kind of like a way of being. And there are a diversity of those within the human population, analogous in many ways to the term biodiversity, which refers to the diversity of life on Earth. Neurodiversity refers to the diversity of minds on Earth, or rather within the human population, I should say. Arguably, this is a social justice and human rights movement in the sense that it aims to destigmatize neurodivergence, which, if you look at what I call the pathology narrative or the medical model around disability, around autism, there's a lot of emphasis on disorder, on pathology, on challenges and hardships. And by referring to autism, ADHD, learning disabilities, OCD, et cetera, that are under the neurodiversity umbrella as neurotypes or the way we're wired, to me, that destigmatizes what have historically been referred to as conditions, disorders, because those words bring about stigma. And I rail against what I call the 3Ds: disability, disorder, diagnosis, in A Long Walk Down a Winding Road. Since its publication, I have made peace with the word disability, but I don't think I'll ever make peace with the word disorder, in the sense that it implies to me and to other advocates that we are broken and that we are in need of repair. That's what we take disorder to mean. I dismiss that. I reject that notion. I just have a mind that's wired differently, that happens to be a neurotype in the minority. And with that outlook, in my mind, comes destigmatization. That's even a word. Bringing down the stigma. And in that light, I view this really as being a social justice, human rights movement, in addition to being a paradigm, a philosophy that destigmatizes neurodivergence, and an alternative to the prevailing pathology narrative or medical model, where with the neurodiversity movement, we're seeking to flip the script on that narrative, which has done volumes and volumes of immeasurable harm to autistics and other neurodivergent individuals over the decades, multiple decades. We're not too far off from 100 years going back, if you look at the legacy of autism. And in the sense that it de-emphasizes disorder in favor of referring to autism as a neurotype that's naturally occurring in the human population, embracing the neurodiversity paradigm, I have found for me, has become invaluable to my sense of self. It gave me permission to move past the disorder aspect. That really did a number on my self-esteem, on my sense of self, to help me to have a more healthy, more positive outlook on my sense of self. So if we are to do justice to the neurodiversity paradigm, we need to talk a little bit, in my opinion, about the social model of disability, which is aligned very closely with the neurodiversity paradigm. And basically what the social model of disability tells us is that in many ways, there are external influences, societal influences that disable us to varying degrees. I would argue in many ways more disabling, I find, than my own inherent challenges. Granted, there's an element, in my opinion, of what disables me based on my inherent challenges. But societal influences exert a sizable disabling force on us. And by that I mean expectations around how we are supposed to behave, how we're supposed to communicate, how we're supposed to interact with other people, how we are to think, how we are to learn. Those expectations are at odds with neurodivergence. Why? Because those expectations were established a long, long time ago without us in mind. And that can be extraordinarily disabling to us. Bullying is a perfect example. Ableism, any number of things. Unrealistic societal expectations, which for me and for many of us, kind of makes us feel like we are square pegs being forced through round holes. That kind of thing. It can really have a pretty awful impact on us. And by placing much of how we're disabled on these societal expectations, and it frees us from putting the onus of the disability entirely on ourselves. And in so doing, in my view, just like with the neurodiversity paradigm itself, can really help sense of self to acknowledge that, hey, what disables me is not all about me. It's about what's going on around me. It's about what's going on in society, what other people are saying about us, what other people are doing to us, whether in an academic setting or at the workplace or in a clinical setting. And it shifts the focus away from this notion of inherent pathology. Now, I'm not blaming society entirely on my disabilities, not entirely, but a good chunk of it I kind of place on society. I mean, after all, I do struggle with things like nonverbal communication. It's better now than it was when I was growing up, but self-awareness, consequently awareness of other people around me. Those sorts of challenges that have really been key to my experience. So a good chunk of it I put on society, but not all of it. A certain amount I do acknowledge is just due to my own inherent challenges. It's not a 0%, 100% sort of scenario in that regard. And because the social model attempts to destigmatize disability by acknowledging these external influences, it kind of makes it in line with what the neurodiversity paradigm is all about. Destigmatization and all the benefits that could come from that. And as an advocate, ultimately, that's one among my goals, is to try to do my part to try to destigmatize neurodivergence for me, for us, for the community. So for me, this was a journey of self-realization. Round age 3, little shy of that, in fact, I came to be diagnosed as learning disabled. My mother noticed certain things in me that she felt should be investigated. This was back in the early 70s. We were fortunate to have a learning specialist locally who, in my mother's estimation, was competent enough to have made the determination, and she did. It's a learning disability in auditory perception, which entitled me to special education, from which I greatly benefited. I was kept back a year, didn't graduate high school until age 19. But I was suffering from internalized ableism, what I talked about 2 weeks ago. I was suffering from low self-esteem, largely because I knew I was different from most of my peers. And I really had an impossible time coming to terms with that. I couldn't accept that about myself. Fast forward to age 40. I write about this in the book and in a published article that came out since the book, that at age 40, as a result of a neuropsych evaluation, I was identified as autistic. I got to work very soon after that on working with clinicians on learning more about what autism entails, learning that it's not all about deficit, but that there are unique attributes and talents and abilities that we have, that it's not all about disability. That kind of work and that kind of learning took time and led at age 47 to me publicly revealing my autism. I wasn't at that point past the pathology narrative lens that I had had up until then. When I publicly revealed my autism, of all places, it was at my mother's funeral while I was eulogizing her, where I wanted to give some context to all that she had done to help me when I was younger, to position me for future happiness and success. And that gave me enough courage to come out as autistic. And but in a way where at that age I was still viewing my autism as a disorder. My eulogy to my mother referred to autism as being a disorder. I would use words like symptoms and hardships. And I didn't speak at all in the eulogy to the fact that my strengths and my unique attributes and talents, I didn't connect them to autism. I just wasn't there yet. It was too early on in my journey to make that connection. So still looking at autism through the lens of the medical model, the pathology narrative. Age 50 is when A Long Walk Down a Winding Road was published. The years leading from age 47 to 50, of course, I was working on getting the book written. I was blogging during that period, writing about my experiences. And finally, at age 50, there are sections in the book, if you've read it, where I do touch on neurodiversity. I refer to the notion of alternative neurologies. I kind of thought about it in that light. But I was railing against the terms disability, diagnosis, That's why I say I was identified as autistic, not diagnosed as autistic. I've tried to move away from the word diagnosis because, again, that's indicative of the medical model that I've moved away from. And I rail against the 3Ds: disability, diagnosis, disorder. I wasn't yet accepting, in that regard, of the fact that I'm disabled. That would take another couple of years, where at age 53, I published an article whereby I explained a transformation that had taken place in terms of my own outlook on my disability. And finally, there, in my mind, was a full embracing of the social model of disability that I write about in that article, some 3 years or so later after the publication of my book. So now I'm good with the word disability. What helped me get there really was learning and reading about the lived experiences of other disabled and autistic individuals, mostly those who I had come to know on LinkedIn was a big part of this. That in listening to and learning from others, you take in other points of view that can be transformative. And in this case, it really was. And I finally came to terms with the word disability, coming to complete terms with it, which I was very happy about. And then sometime last year, around age 54, 55, somewhere in there, I started to tell people, hey, counterintuitive though it may seem to you, I can say that I'm proudly and unapologetically autistic. Up until a year ago or so, you'd never hear me say that, but I finally reached that place where I could say that, and I'm still very much in that place now. So it's a journey. Embracing neurodiversity, moving past the medical model, coming to terms with certain words that have historically been used in society to describe us. It's a journey. It was for me. It's been a journey for many whom I know, and perhaps for some of you as well. The neurodiversity lexicon. With the movement, there have been a bunch of words, terms, to come out of the movement. And it's a mixed bag. Some of these terms I'm good with, others I take issue with. But this is, I think, a pretty decent sampling of some of the key terms that have arisen as a result of the neurodiversity movement and the emergence of the neurodiversity paradigm. Neurotype, I mentioned earlier. Neurotype refers to how an individual's brain and nervous system are wired, the diversity of minds within the human population, different ways of being, where autism is a neurotype, ADHD. Arguably, you could say that ADHD, those of us with both challenges, that in my mind could be construed as a neurotype in itself. ADHD doesn't seem to be relevant to me so much, in the sense that I once saw somebody about it. He prescribed medication that I didn't respond to at all. And what I have come to know about ADHD, I don't think really pertains to me all that much. I could be wrong. But autism, ADHD, ADHD, my learning disability, that's a neurotype, however you want to slice it up, depending upon who we are and our lived experiences. But it's a multitude of neurotypes that exist in the human population. Neurotypical, that would refer to what, according to most studies, are the 80% of us who are not neurodivergent. You could refer to neurotypical individuals as being in the neuro majority, where you're non-autistic, no ADHD or learning disability. Studies show about 80% of us, the studies I've looked at and written about. And then neurodivergent, as well as neurodistinct, refers to people like me and many of you, I'm sure, as being in the neuro minority. 20% of us, roughly 1 in 5, according to studies. Neurodistinct, I think, has a little more of a positive spin to it than neurodivergent does, in the sense that neurodistinct is often used in the context of our strengths and our skills and our unique attributes, where neurodivergent isn't always mentioned in that context. This is a nice word, neurokindred, or its abbreviated term that I've heard, neurokin, where I'm autistic. If you're autistic as well, we are neurokindred. So like-minded, neurokindred. This is a word that I've come to really love because it's quirky, it's casual, neurospicy. Somebody who I didn't know was neurodivergent until she admitted to me that she was, said with a smile, yeah, I'm neurospicy, just like you. And that put a smile on my face, the way she said that. That resonated. I thought I'd put that in here for that reason. I've heard other people refer to themselves as neurospicy. If it's more casual, if it's quirky, there's perhaps an element of humor to the word. Again, I would argue that that helps to destigmatize, and if you adopt that descriptor for yourself, I would argue that it could help sense of self as well. Neuronormative. This word is a really big deal, I think, in all the wrong ways. I talked at length about this during my internalized ableism talk. The problem with neuronormativity is that it speaks to how society defines normal. What the heck is normal supposed to mean? Really, the meaning of the word normal, in my view, is going to differ from one person to the next based on who they are and their lived experiences. There's no one definition of normal, yet society somehow has a way of imposing on a societal level what it defines as normal. And that is a prime example, speaking to the social model of disability, of how an external influence like neuronormativity, how disabling it can be when brought to an extreme. What goes on at the school I keep talking about where aversive behavioral interventions, including electric shock, are used on autistic and other disabled individuals to try to make them more neurotypical by trying to suppress behaviors that the school feels need to be suppressed. Prime example of neuronormativity brought to an arguably torturous extreme, just to name one among many examples. Full body listening, that when you listen, you have to make eye contact. Full body listening would be another example of a neuronormative expectation that can be very, very disabling to us, where often we intentionally look away. We don't make the eye contact because that can be a sensory self-regulatory strategy that we depend on that enables us to listen better with our ears and perhaps even more importantly with our hearts, but which is at odds with the full body listening. Neuronormative expectation would be another example of neuronormativity. Very, very disabling. Neuroaffirming, on the other hand, this is a wonderful word. Neuroaffirming healthcare, neuroaffirming practices at the workplace, clinical settings that properly take neurodivergence into account. For example, in a clinical setting, if you have a neurodivergent client and you meet that client where they are, as opposed to where you think they should be, taking into account the neurodivergent client's sensory sensitivities, taking into account what is known to trigger that individual into emotional unease or an emotional meltdown. Understanding and listening to their lived experiences, understanding their abilities and talents and unique attributes. Why not incorporate those into a clinical experience, for example? That might be an example of a neuro-affirming clinical praxis type scenario, for example. My parents were neuro-affirming parents. My mother was wonderful at meeting me where I was at. She never made me feel like I was disordered or broken and in need of repair. She often let me do things my way and then let me fall and get myself back up, figure things out for myself in my own way, in my own time. She had realistic expectations of me, keeping top of mind my learning disability, etc. To me, my parents were neuroaffirming before the term neurodiversity was even coined. So those are all examples of what I mean here when I say neuroaffirming, properly taking neurodivergence into account. And there are other ones, but I think these are key among the terms here to keep in mind. These are the ones that I come across more often. So where to turn to for more information? I've written a lot about neurodiversity in various articles with respect to the workplace, with respect to certain experiences I had in school, in college, neurodiversity affirming healthcare, and other articles about neurodiversity. The article that I published about a transformation in how I view my own disability when I embrace the social model. All of those articles, author talk videos that are relevant, they're all on my website, like Roger said earlier, on the media page, samfarmerauthor.com/media. And I can be reached there too. Any of you can feel free to reach out to me on my website via its contact page. The Casey Facebook group. There are plenty of posts in Casey, Cultural Autism Studies at Yale, with articles that are relevant to neurodiversity. Another Facebook group, Neurodiversity Newsstand. And I'm sure there are plenty of others that are relevant to autism, to neurodiversity. But Casey and Neurodiversity Newsstand come to mind. Like I was saying earlier about LinkedIn, it was mostly through connecting with other neurodivergent individuals on LinkedIn that I've learned a great deal, that I wouldn't be the advocate that I am today without learning from fellow neurospicy individuals on LinkedIn, sharing their lived experiences, their philosophies. If you connect to me through LinkedIn, in all likelihood, LinkedIn would point you in the direction to other autistic individuals in this community, if you were to connect with me, if you aren't already. And then I can't say enough for this book, Neurotribes, highly acclaimed, wonderful book by only very recently deceased Steve Silberman, passed away a few months ago. I can't say enough for this book, and full disclosure, because of how long it is and because of how slow I can be at processing information because of my learning disability, that I'm only about halfway through it. But even so, I can still praise how great this book is based on what I have read in it and based on what I've heard other advocates say about this book, which really delves into wonderful detail, but in a very accessible way, about the legacy of autism, the history of it, and what the author feels the future of neurodiversity looks like. Great book. Can't say enough about it. And that pretty much covers what I have to say about neurodiversity. There's a lot more that could be said, but that's pretty much what I came up with for this particular session. And that leaves a good chunk of time for questions, for thoughts. I'll admit that I struggle with chat messages. Reading them, responding to them tends to take me a long time to do. I see there are a bunch of comments in the chat. Roger, in the past, you've been kind enough to read them, and then I can respond to them that way. That probably saves time.
Yes, there's a few comments here that I think are definitely worth highlighting. And if anybody wants, if anyone prefers to text and have it read out loud to the group, just write the word read and then what you want us to read out loud. There is a comment that's asking here, is there a more specific term for prejudice that neurodiverse people suffer from, neurotypicals, similar to prejudices like racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ageism, or is ableism the only term available in English right now?
Well, I'll try to respond to that. There's a great deal of intersectionality in our community. Our community is anything but monolithic. Certainly autistic women, from what I've been able to gather, can have very different experiences from neurodivergent men because of the gender aspect. There's race, there's LGBTQ or not. There are all kinds of intersectionalities, every one that you can imagine. And it's worthwhile, therefore, to try to learn about the lived experiences of a number of different people in our community who exhibit just the unbelievable diversity that exists in our community with respect to intersectionality. Because I'm arguably lucky, and I feel as though I'm lucky in many ways for all the wrong reasons. I write in the book about how I long for a more level playing field for all of us. But I have to admit that for all the wrong reasons, the reason why I feel I've been as fortunate as I have been with respect to workplace success, finding happiness in life, having been able to conquer my internalized ableism, etc., that a lot of that must be due to the fact that I'm male, that the color of my skin is white, and admittedly that I was fortunate enough to grow up in a household that was financially relatively well off. So I had experiences that helped me that admittedly a number of people, can't afford or wouldn't have access to. And I'm not good with that at all. Granted, I don't beat myself up for being a white male, cisgender, heterosexual male. I won't beat myself up for being who I am. But I acknowledge that I have privilege that I wish all of us had. And I hate that it just simply does not work that way. And to me, that's just wrong. Maybe that's a good response to that comment. I don't know.
I've also heard the term neurodiscrimination.
Sure.
And so I guess
Yeah.
that's more, it doesn't, it's a little longer. But there is a funny comment here. The term neurodifficult.
It's one
Is
I'll
a
admit I haven't heard before, but
no. This is in reference to neurotypical people. So neurotypicals are neurodifficult, not the other way around.
absolutely. That's wonderful. I love that. That's wonderful. Absolutely. What did
That's
I
pretty
hear
funny.
the other day? I heard neurotypical spectrum disorder. I mean, neurotypical people arguably exist on a spectrum. And why not call it a disorder? Because the official terminology in the DSM-5 is ASD, autism spectrum disorder. No, thank you. I reject the fact that I'm disordered. I just have a minority neurotype that's been stigmatized to the point of being looked at by many as a disorder, but I don't buy into that. But sure, nobody's perfect. We all have our flaws, our challenges. We all self-regulate differently. We all stim in different ways. We all have challenges and hardships of different types. But it manifests differently with neurodivergent individuals than with neurotypical individuals. But we can all choose to look at it however way we want to. With neurodivergence, with autism, with disability, there's more than one way to look at certain things. And these are prime examples of that. More than one way to look at something. Which way are you going to choose? Are you going to choose to look at it more through the lens of the pathology narrative or medical model, or are you going to look at it through the neurodiversity / social model type lens, as I have come to found has really helped my sense of self? Because nothing matters more arguably than your sense of self. how you view yourself. This is where neurodiversity and that paradigm was extremely helpful to me, was with respect to that. And that's everything. Whatever goes on in the world around you, if you can work towards and acquire a solid sense of self, a sense of pride in who you are, that's the key. That's the key.
There's a recommendation from someone to check out Nick Walker's book, Neuroqueer Heresies, as a great resource for terminology. There's a few
Sure.
links in the chat to some videos and the writings of Nick Walker.
Sure.
Also,
Autistic in Black is another great book. Autistic in Black, Kayla Allen Omeiza, if I've pronounced that correctly. I'm not sure if I have, but it's called Autistic in Black. With respect to intersectionality and to what people who are arguably dealing with layers of stigma are up against, which is very unsettling to me, largely because I can't know what that's like. Being white male, autistic, I can't know. But this is a good book to learn more about it. It's another good one. And there are so many of them. You could do a search, neurodivergent writers, neurodivergent authors, autistic writers, autistic authors. There are so many of them, which I celebrate because that's what the movement is trying to do. We need an all hands on deck effort in this movement to destigmatize what we're up against. And the way to do that is for everybody, but this is easier said than done because of the stigma, to share their philosophies, their beliefs, their lived experiences. Because the more we do that, the more we talk about disability, the more we talk about autism, the more we're going to help to destigmatize it. Keeping silent about it's not going to help. But this can be easier said than done. This can be frightening, can even be terrifying to come out in this way, to unmask. But all kinds of books.
Yeah, there's also praise for the book you mentioned by Steve Silverman, Neurotribes.
Exactly, that's the one I mentioned. It's all kinds of awards. And what I love about this book is that it's substantive and thoughtfully written, but very accessible. His writing, I find, is very accessible, relatively easy to understand and comprehend, which for me, growing up, reading comprehension was my worst subject in school. I struggled with it, largely because of my learning disability. But even I found this book, have found it to be relatively accessible, and that says a lot, granted what I've had to deal with my learning disability. Yeah. It's a good one.
Right. And I should also mention, if you want to say something, you can raise your hand, either using the raise hand button, or if you just want to wave in front of the screen. It has
Sure.
I always have something to say. I have a question, but you actually answered my question. My question, well, yes, you answered my question. My question was in reference to, I work with parents, and parents are given very incorrect information, right, when they receive a diagnosis. And there's battle around, levels, and oh, you want to embrace neurodiversity, and I'm having so much trouble, and all these other things. And so I was going to ask, what is the one thing you wish parents knew so that they could shift that narrative about autism? But you actually answered the question when you said that it's the sense of self, and parents who don't have a strong sense of self of themselves can accept their autistic child because they're still not, they don't even have their own, so it's hard. Gosh, I mean, I just am gonna meander on that all day.
It's a very, very difficult situation to be in because arguably you can't really love an individual wholeheartedly if you don't love yourself.
Yep.
For those of you who grew up in the 80s or thereabouts listening to 80s music, one of my favorite songs, which speaks to this very thing, is Whitney Houston's song, The Greatest Love of All. One aspect of which, aside from her phenomenal voice, are the lyrics to this song. They're brilliantly written lyrics that send a very clear message about how learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all. If you don't love yourself, it's going to be that much more challenging to love others. And that's what your comment kind of conjured up in me, that I would say, look, there are a lot of insights that I write about in A Long Walk Down a Winding Road, in my author talk on internalized ableism and how I conquered it, that speak to how you can go about conquering internalized ableism and to build self-esteem. That for those who haven't been as fortunate as I have been, which is a bunch of us, this is why I wrote the book, is so that somebody could actually use it to help themselves. But in order to do that, you've got to admit to yourself that there's an issue worth working on. You have to admit that to yourself. And that kind of awareness is arguably half the challenge.
It's is. Thank you. And I think that, you know, we could have a discussion on this, I'm sure, um, forever, but just that intersectionality, because I work with a lot of families that are from other countries, but even in the States, parents who are Black and brown, a lot of times, because they are worried about the safety of their Black male in America, they want them to be subjected to ABA because they're worried about their children not being safe. And so that's a lot to consider when you're parenting a child and trying to balance the trauma of a therapy, but knowing it puts my child at risk. Like, there's a whole lot of stuff involved in the decision making. Yeah. All right.
And I wish I
Could speak to that more, but I can't because I don't have the lived experiences of a person of color. I don't have those lived experiences. I try very hard only to speak to that which I feel qualified to speak to. But I bet you have good advice as a person of color to those
individuals.
It's one of the reasons I'm doing my documentary with my students. But also, I raised two 6'3" Black males in America, and yeah, lot. I mean, you know, this is not about that, but it is really interesting how people respond differently um, to certain groups of people, which is a shame. Like you said, it's a shame. Thank you so much for your insight. I think I have a class to teach a student waiting, but thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? I can run a little bit over. I told Roger I've got a hard stop at 3:15 because this is, after all, a work day for me. But I can take a few more minutes if anybody wants to ask a question or make a comment.
Yeah, there's an interesting comment here I'm going to read. It says, I think being susceptible to neuronormative social conditioning is the disorder. The root of most horrible things seem to be a combination of social conditioning and dissonance resolution. That is, how is victim blaming not seen as the wrong way to think?
Yeah. That's the problem. We often insist that we are right and that others are in the wrong. And when right and wrong clash with each other, as I understand it, that's where the cognitive dissonance comes in. And that's a challenge to deal with. The only resolution for that I can think of is what luckily I was able to learn a long time ago, which is the importance of listening to and even taking to heart other viewpoints, open-mindedness, being able to listen and empathize with others who maybe have a different way of looking at things, because the way we look at things, what we believe is inevitably going to stem from who we are, our lived experiences. And it's hard to be open-minded, but I feel as though that would perhaps be a remedy for the kind of cognitive dissonance being described here.
Hey, Sam, do you think that that's similar to internalized ableism?
Well, when you're told your whole life that you're in the wrong, you're behaving wrong, you're communicating wrong, you're not learning or thinking the way that I think. Because again, a lot of people will think that their way is the right way. That's where trouble ensues. Rather than a more open-minded perspective of, well, this is me, but other people are going to look at things differently. But if you're told those things repeatedly, Roger, for an extended length of time, that you're in the wrong, that you're doing this wrong, that wrong, you've got to change this, you got to change that, certainly that contributes to developing internalized ableism, which of course can be destructive to sense of self.
We have a raised hand. Do you want to say something?
Yes, hi. My name and I did put the question in chat, but I wanted to ask because I was worried this was about to end. Other civil rights movements have had leaders and organizations that advocate for their civil rights and social acceptance, like Gloria Steinem, Thurgood Marshall, Martin Luther King, Harvey Milk. What are the neurodiversity rights movements that I should be following and supporting?
Well, I've come to know a number of truly remarkable people on LinkedIn, some of whom are members of the KC community. I mean, I look, granted, much of what she has said can be triggering to individuals, but I'm good with most of what Temple Grandin has said over the years. I've heard far worse. Her outlook on things might be a little dated at this point because I believe at this point she's maybe in her 70s. But Temple Grandin comes to mind. I read the book by Stephen Shore, Beyond the Wall is a book of his, which resonated with me, Stephen Shore. Certainly Steve Silverman's book, Neurotribes, his wisdom. And on LinkedIn, there are so many of them, but a few that come to mind are Dan Harris, whose son, the Joshi man, is perhaps the best known non-speaking autistic in Europe at this point, thanks to his advocacy. Dan Harris, Pete Warmby, Becca Laurie Hector, who I know is a member of our community. Roger, I would certainly argue Dawn Prince Hughes. These are all among many, many folks, but those are the names I can think of off the top of my mind. Laura Schaefer, Dr. Shirley Woods Gallagher. If you reach out to me on my website, I can provide a listing of many of these names.
Oh, thank you. I hope for me at least.
These are individuals in the movement working towards greater neuro-inclusion, particularly in the workplace, where after all, this is LinkedIn, through which I've had interactions with them. That are worth looking into, who have all written books, whose social media posts and posts on LinkedIn are worth looking at, and who you can find if you Google these names. In my view, these are people in the thick of the movement who are really doing, in my view, huge things for the community.
Is there an overall organization?
Well, you have AANE.org, the Association for Autism and Neurodiversity. I think of Casey more us as a community more than an organization. And a bunch of companies. I mentioned Laura Schaefer earlier. Her practice is called Autism Discovery. Carol Jean Whittington, who's a member of our community, has Whittington Wellbeing. Those are names of companies that neurodivergent individuals started up themselves. But as far as organizations go, AANE comes to mind off the top of my head for organizations. That comes to mind, AANE.org. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Sam. If anyone else wants to say something, please raise your hand. Otherwise, I'm just going to read a few more comments here before we close it out.
Sure.
One comment is, I always think of, quote, normal, unquote, as hegemony of the culture or power. But
Yes.
I think that I'm the only one who defines it that way.
Yeah. I mean, you've got those in society who have power and those who don't. And our colonial history in America, at least, kind of set up, I think, the kind of power structure that exists to this day, that our ideas, how we look at certain things, knowledge, expectations of how we're supposed to exist in this world, what we learned in school. Arguably, a lot of that stems from the colonial heritage in this country. There are a lot of other viewpoints. I've heard neurodivergent individuals talking about the wisdom of tribal elders of indigenous peoples because of how they've been discriminated against and waged war on, arguably. Those ideas, those philosophies don't make it into the classroom or don't make it into our heads the way arguably maybe they should be. That there are those with power and without, and that, yeah, neuronormativity speaks to what the power structure in society has decided is normal, where everything else is deemed abnormal. And that's a highly problematic way of thinking. Again, so much for open-mindedness, which I feel would be a way to address this issue. But yeah.
And I should also say that there's a few talks coming up that address that issue in all of its different complexities. because it's something I don't think gets nearly enough attention. Gets the attention it really deserves. So
Indeed.
thank you for whoever brought that up. Okay, everyone. Well, I think we're 10 after 3. I don't want to have you run too much over, Sam. I know at 3:15 you got something else. So thank you for going over. I hope 5 minutes is enough to decompress for your next thing, you know. But did you
All
want to have
good.
any closing remarks?
Thank you all very much for being here. Again, my website is mentioned right there next to my name, samfarmerauthor.com. Don't be shy about reaching out. You can request the slide presentation if you feel that having that handy could help. There's information there about my book and buttons on certain web pages that take you to my Amazon author page from which the book can be ordered if you so choose. And you can join my mailing list. There are fields on just about every page for joining my mailing list where I announce newly published articles, podcasts, author talk videos once they become available. Certainly the video for this presentation will eventually become available. People on my mailing list find out about all these things, upcoming author talks. So visit samfarmerauthor.com and feel free to reach out. And thank you for your
Thanks.
time today. Greatly appreciated.
As always, thank you, Sam, and everyone. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you again very soon.
Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.